Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com. Purple Daily, presented by Surly Brewing Company.
Football, yeah! Football! Football!
That was like the soundtrack going through all of our heads. Whoop, there it is. There's the rest of it. To restart this. Every week I have to restart my button bar. It's kind of it's like a janky button bar. Probably upgrade that. This is Purple Daily, janky Vikings talk. Actually, it's not. It's Daily Vikings Entertainment, and thank you guys for making this one of the most listened to and popular football podcasts in America in 2022, according to Apple. We appreciate you guys. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die, and finding someone to run a better defense is a huge step in that direction. So we're going to get into the latest defensive coordinator fodder, who the Vikings are interviewing in the coming days here. The show is presented by our friends at TCL. No matter what you watch, TCL has award-winning TVs for any budget, any space, all with stunning picture quality. And TCL makes more than just TVs. They offer mobile products, audio devices, home appliances. TCL brings you joy and simplicity through innovative technology. And certainly brings you joy as well, even after a disappointing end to the Vikings season.
That's true, but Sunday was the perfect day for two things. One, football, just glorious. Two really fun games. And two, sitting on your couch watching that football with a Surly, with a Furious, with a Logic Bomb, with an Axeman. I could go down the list before I die. But you know what? The key thing is football and Surly go hand in hand. They're a perfect combination, which is why they are one of the presenting sponsors of our show right here, Surly Brewing. As always, and I had a couple people do this yesterday as well, and on Saturday, show us your cans. Whatever Surly you're sipping on, show us a can at Jay Zolgad, at Score North on Twitter. We always appreciate that.
Yes. All right. So we are devoted to picking apart everything the Vikings need to do, things that we think they should do, things that they are doing. We've just gone headfirst starting last Monday into Vikings offseason fodder. How can they make this thing better, short-term, long-term, to accomplish the ultimate goal, not only on this podcast, but for the actual franchise to win a Super Bowl? And so they decided last week, Ed Donatel, you're not part of that blueprint anymore. Respectfully, thank you so much, but we're going to say goodbye to you. And they have announced, or it's been reported anyways, that they're going to interview at least 3 candidates, probably more. I'm guessing there's going to be some more names trickle out here, but the 3 names we know are linked to the Vikings right now are Brian Flores, former Miami Dolphins head coach, sued the NFL. Now he's been a special assistant in Pittsburgh under Mike Tomlin. Mm-hmm. Only 40 years old, 40, 42. Even though he's been with the Belichick staff he was with the Patriots for 10 years.
Yep.
But just a guy that feels like he's been around for 20, 25 years, but he's not that old. Mm-hmm. Sean Desai, who was the defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears in 2021, currently the associate head coach and the defensive coach for the Seahawks. And then Ryan Nielsen, the Saints co-defensive coordinator. So these are your 3 guys right now on a list. Judd has done some background research. What scheme do these guys run? So let's start with Brian Flores. What do we know about Brian Flores and his potential candidacy here?
41 years young. 41 years,
yeah.
So he's not old. To Phil's point, he was a longtime defensive assistant with Belichick. He was the de facto DC, but because the Patriots operate in mysterious ways and don't give titles sometimes, he didn't have that title before becoming Dolphins coach. And the connection with Kevin O'Connell is O'Connell was a third-string quarterback with the Patriots in 2008 when Brian Flores was there, okay? Now, but what I want to get into is the skinny of what these guys do. What do they run? How do they think? I don't know what they eat for breakfast, but if I could have found out, I would have.
Difficult conversations. That's what they need to be eating. Right.
And 2 things to keep in mind. They are going to interview people for this job, but my guess is O'Connell's also trying to pick people's brains he respects because the platform exists to do it, to get ideas as well. So there might be some guys that he brings in. He doesn't have an eye on hiring, but he likes what the system they've run or who they know. So it's always smart to try and pick a person's brain when you can, and the opportunity to go through like a DC search does exactly that. All right. The skinny on Brian Flores. And I got this from our friend Tyler Fornes, who of course I work with at Vikings Wire, where you can find the Home of Sports Dad's columns.
Wow.
All right. Flores runs a 3-4 base, but it's not Fangio's. So it's not the Donatel, it's not the Fangio, it's not the defense that O'Connell brought in on purpose, very much so in 2022. He runs most of his coverage out of a cover one base that leaves a single high safety. So keep in mind, 3-4 Fangio too high eliminates. Well, it's supposed to big pass plays. This is a cover one. That's going to call for the corners in more man coverage. It can morph again into a 4-3. Most importantly, I think I would consider this to be a more aggressive defense.
Yes, I also did. I don't know that I did the scheme insiding that you did, but in my limited notes, I wrote down aggressive in all caps when looking at this sort of Brian Flores Dolphins going back to Patriots defense, taking the fight to opposing offenses. And statistically, just to add some seasoning here too. So Miami, when he was there at Miami for 3 years as the head coach, sort of, installing what he wanted to install, right? They had a 40% blitz rate over his last 2 years in Miami, which was the second highest in the NFL. They led the NFL in takeaways his second year in Miami, and they were among the best pressure defenses too. They had the 6th best scoring defense second year in Miami, and the best third down defense second year in Miami. Aggressive, attack, make opposing quarterbacks feel uncomfortable.
Don't sit back. Which drove me nuts. Now, the Fangio scheme with the right personnel does work, so I'm not saying it doesn't, but I would rather, in watching the playoff games too, like it just crystallizes. If I have a choice, okay, my passive defense could work, but I also could play aggressive. I'm taking aggressive every time. And I would say a key question, assuming he's back, and until we see he won't be, I'm going to assume that he will, is one of my first questions to a candidate would be, how are you going to use Danielle Hunter? Not how does your scheme work? If
how are you going to use the draft capital that we get back in a trade for Danielle Hunter?
That's fine, but I want to know, like, Kendrick's gone, Harrison Smith, I think back, but not positive. Patrick Peterson gone. Like, I want to go through the players coming back and say, how would you use these guys? Not just what does your scheme look like and how are they going to fit it? Because I think that was a huge mistake with the Donatel 3-4 that he tried to install. It was all about what he was going to do, and it's like the players that they had were never considered.
Well, you've brought up, I think, probably the biggest problem, if you will. If I'm Brian Flores, who, by the way, is interviewing today on this Monday for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job. So if he wants to be and believes that he should be a head coach again in the near future, he'll only take defensive coordinator jobs if he doesn't get a head coaching job. And that Cardinals process could play out for 2 weeks because this will be a first. They're doing their first round of interviews. Then they go into finalists. If he becomes a finalist, then that'll take place like late in the week or early next week. So my guess is he's going to play this out with Arizona and anyone else that might want to interview him as a head coach first. And then if he had to take a coordinator job again, and he's interviewed for a couple of those or he's in the mix, he would probably pick the job that could catapult him back into head coaching contention. If he's going to look at this set of personnel and say, all right, well, so Patrick Peterson is maybe gone, but if he's back, very much aging. I don't know who the linebackers are going to be. Zadarius Smith, who, by the way, washed all of the Vikings references from his social media this weekend.
Okay, yeah, I think he's gone.
He might have been told that already, too. Thank you so much. Wash it out. Hunter might get traded. So if I'm Flores, I have just as many questions for the Vikings, if not more, as they would have for me. And that's after the head coaching stuff plays out.
I sense that this one is done to talk to him about what he would do. Like, I don't think, I bet he and Kevin are acquaintances and probably like friends of some point. This just provides, This opportunity provides a great chance to get people in front of you and to basically spill their guts.
Yeah. But I would take him. Like if let's say he didn't get a head coaching job, and even if it was like a 1 or 2 year stopgap thing for him to catapult his way into
I agree.
the head coaching mix, cool. That's kind of how defensive. If you want great defensive coordinators, they're going to be gone in like 2 or 3 years. If they're head coaching material, I'm fine. Mike Tomlin was here for 1 year in 2006 and helped.
No one saw that coming.
Right. So he would be very, very high on my list, like the whole list, not including just the guys the Vikings are talking to. So interesting. Okay. How about Sean Desai, who they interviewed last year? May have been did they get him a second interview? They liked him a lot last year, enough to bring him back a second time here. And my question to you guys over the weekend as we were texting about this stuff is, would you reject a guy last year, bring him back again for interviews, and then reject him a second time? It may be. The answer is he needs to do well and present, but it shows how much they're really interested in Sean Desai, that they're bringing him back after rejecting him last year as sort of a, hey, well, sorry, the Ed Donatel thing didn't work out. We really, really liked you last year. Let's start over again and go on our first date for a second time.
So he was, as you talked about, Phil, he was the DC in Chicago in 2021, and then last season a Seattle associate head coach and deep defensive assistant, which seems to be what's going on more now. Like we're getting a lot of defensive assistants, like Mike Patton is, right? Like he's an assistant. He had the coordinator title somewhere at one time. His defense is interesting because in Chicago in 2021, with not a good team, it was 22nd in points allowed, but 6th in total defense. And part of the problem there was, and I think we talked about this last year as well, when he went through the process, the offense in Chicago in 2021 had a minus 13 turnover differential, which was 30th. So they were basically giving up short fields continually. Yeah. So the defense got dinged for scoring, but they actually held teams in yards.
Love it. Oh, okay. See, that's the type of stuff right there. That if you just look from a distance and say, "Well, look at this." No one's saying that they were like the 2000 Ravens or anything, but context is a huge, huge factor in some of this stuff. You can't just look and say, "Well, I mean, look at the." We'll get to Ryan Nielsen. Well, the Saints defense wasn't that good. Okay, well, they're not just putting a blindfold on and throwing a dart and saying, oh, let's just interview this random guy. There are reasons why they like these people, but there's a reason why they like Donatel too. So we fully trust them.
So the skinny on Desai is this. He would bring Fangio's system from the Bears days, but with some tweaks, because Pete Carroll and Seahawks DC Clint Hurt have specialized in cover 3, cover 7, but they wanted to install elements of Fangio's scheme. Okay. Football. So they said to Desai, hey, the 3-4 that Vic runs has some great things, but unlike what O'Connell said, which is, Ed, just come here and install this. They said, no, we're defensive guys. So let's actually incorporate some of the Fangio system to our cover 3, cover 7. And now you're saying, okay, Sports Dad, what the hell does that mean? You are just
translate.
This is no longer funny, Sports Dad. You're just trying to Bigfoot us with your big terms. Cover 3 is a zone look with 4 underneath and 3 deep. Cover 7 is a 2 high split field coverage that calls for its players to distribute routes tightly, running with the receiver, so more man concept, even across the field. Football. So we're basically talking about a guy
now.
So
the middle of the field may be covered in this defensive scheme.
I know you're going to be shocked by this, but you don't just allow free releases on crossing routes. Okay. I know that's going to shock you.
So you can play. Are you allowed to step within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage if you are a cornerback before the ball is snapped?
I actually have a call into the league right now because I'm not sure if the rule got changed, but I guess you are, which shocked me.
Well, I saw some cornerbacks this weekend that I was like, well, that's not allowed. Are the refs not watching what's happening? They're literally standing on the line of scrimmage and they're putting their hands on wide receivers.
I was appalled, and I was just waiting for the flag to fly, and it didn't. But long story short, they might be talking to Desai again because of the fact that he brought Fangio concepts to Seattle, but then married them with a couple of smart defensive guys, because Pete Carroll is definitely a smart defensive coach, married them with the Seahawks concepts, which is going to give him more reference points now than he had probably last year.
Another praise here, and I know that I've been living in Seattle for a couple of years. I don't pay like super close attention to the Seahawks, despite what people may think.
You don't. Yeah,
I'm not glued to their every personnel move.
Whatever.
Right, Pete.
Whatever.
Yeah, me and Pete Carroll like to.
You are the 12th man.
We like to meet up and just chew gum together.
You climb the flagpole.
Couple bubble
you
gum
climb
guys.
the flagpole before our games, and you're the 12th man.
But one of the big praises of the Seahawks this season is that they've had to, the Legion of Boom defense that launched 10 years ago, all those guys are basically gone, and they've had to take sort of second-tier players or young players or mid to late round draft picks, and they've had to remold this thing. And that defensive coaching staff, and they wound up like 25th in points, so it wasn't a great defense, but there were some individual stories of players that were asked to step up. They developed guys kind of on the fly, and they held their own as a team, and they had some good defensive performances. So if you're looking for a guy to come in here, work with younger players or special teams players that need to graduate to the defense, the Asamoahs, the Josh Metellises, does Sean Desai fit that category? And I think it's fair to say between Flores and Desai, and I'm not reporting this or anything, I'm just sort of speculating, that if you were to say to both those guys, hey, so as part of our, what's it called, competitive rebuild, the offense is going to be really competitive because we got all these pieces. The defense is rebuilding. We're saying goodbye to everyone over the age of 30 or most of these guys. Maybe you keep Harrison Smith or something, but you're going to have to mold this ball of clay, and you're going to have to take guys that might not actually be starters and get something out of them. Brian Flores has options. Sean Desai might not. He finished runner-up to Jim Schwartz for the Cleveland defensive coordinator job. He's like, 40 years old? He might be more willing to take a job like this with fewer pieces to work with than an established former head coach like Brian Flores. So that is a factor in all this.
He was also retained by 3 different head coaches in Chicago. So Trestman,
he's a Mark Trestman guy, yeah.
He was a Mark Trestman guy.
Oh, I'm out now.
He was brought in from Trestman.
I'm out. Okay, forget about it.
He was a Trestman guy before he was a Fangio and Nagy guy.
And then was retained by John Fox in 2015, and then obviously Matt Nagy in 2018. And I know you're probably thinking Mark Trestman, Matt Nagy, even John Fox passes fastball. Like, all those aren't the most studious and greatest head coaches that have been around before. But also, that's 2 different regimes that came and said, no, this guy knows what he's doing. And I think that says a lot. And also for Pete Carroll to give him even an associate head coach and defensive assistant role. He got into coaching at 29 years old. Yep. He took that job with Chicago with Mark Trestman at 29. So even though he's knocking on the door of 40 now, 10 years later, he's been around a block. He has other people that have retained him. I think he is probably strongly being considered for the Vikings defensive coordinator job.
Yeah, that's because usually when guys that's a great point. Mark Trestman hired him like 10 years ago as just like a quality control guy or something, a young guy. And usually, as you know, Judd, covering the NFL for a long time, when a new coach comes in, almost everyone gets blown out, not because they're like incompetent, but because you want to bring in guys that it's okay. I've been making my list for 15 years. If I ever get this job, here's who I'm calling. For him to make it through not just one transition, but multiple transitions and stick around probably says something about his character, his ability as a coach, a teacher. So we'll see.
And I think one trend that we are seeing, at least from the first 3 names that have surfaced as candidates, is, and I like this one, we're not going to go, it looks like, the veteran crusty route now.
Mm-hmm.
No, these dudes are all like 40 years
old.
Flores
is 41. Desai is right now 39. And the guy we're about to talk about is 43. So I think we're done. I think we're done with, he and Fangio were contemporaries and we're boys and we go to the bar and have a beer and just eat and drink footballs. I think we're going to get a coach now that's far more along O'Connell's line of age, which I think is a smart move.
All right, let's get to that third guy here. And again, this list may expand at some point this week, but these are the 3 guys that we know reportedly the Vikings are going to interview for the open defensive coordinator job. Ryan Nielsen, currently the New Orleans Saints co-defensive coordinator under Dennis Allen. He was originally hired by Sean Payton in 2017 to coach the defensive line, and he did just that under Peyton for like 4 or 5 years, and then got elevated to co-defensive coordinator. He also, interestingly, turned down the LSU defensive coordinator job going into Ed Orgeron's last year in 2001.
It's a good move.
You may think, oh, it's a college DC job. That is one of the like 5 or 6 premier, highest paid college defensive coordinator jobs. And this dude was in the running and turned it down as like a finalist. The Saints ran a 4-3 defense base last year, and I'm sure Judd has even more details. But if Sean Payton identifies you as someone that's worthy of coming on board and sticks with you, interesting. Now, Sean Payton hasn't been known as the greatest defensive mastermind, but when smart, credible,
worked.
It's true. Yes, he puts together good incentive programs.
Exactly, incentive-laden defensive programs to take out Brett Favre at the knees.
But a smart, maybe future Hall of Fame coach putting trust in someone. It's an interesting connection, the Sean Payton connection. But what else do you know about Ryan Nielsen?
Well, I would say of the 3 guys that we've talked about so far, this one's the biggest curveball. Because one, his name, I had not seen his name at all until this came up in a report. I believe it was Ian Rappaport and Ben Gessling of the Star Tribune had this on Sunday. And the list of 11, Phil, that you brought to the table early last week had Desai, it had Flores, it didn't have this guy. So Ryan Nielsen is a curveball, and here's why. According to Sports Info Solutions, the Saints ran mostly 4 down linemen with 4-2-5 sets, 11th most in the league. So
that'd be like a 4-3 with a nickel, right?
Yes, exactly right, which I actually like because it takes a linebacker off the field. So 4-2-5, and then the Saints ran the 6th most 4-3-4 sets. They ran 175 snaps with only 1 down lineman and 68 with 1. So we're talking about they get very creative. And I sort of like that. But this definitely sounds formationally different. Like Donatel and O'Connell ran different sets. I'm not saying that they didn't. But this does sound like a little bit of a curveball. And this is probably the most surprising name to surface, which is why it didn't come up on like your list or list that we saw last week.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, O'Connell clearly wanted to run some sort of a 3-4 variation when he took the job. And I believe he even commented in his press conference last week. I missed this, but other people said that he made reference to wanting to keep the same defensive scheme if possible. And Flores and Desai would help carry that sort of 3-4 forward in some variety. But I like the fact that he's going outside of that box. If he feels like Ryan Nielsen can bring something totally different to the table, sit down with him for 4 hours and see what he has to say and what he would do with some of these pieces.
I am curious too. Like, so O'Connell really liked the idea coming in of that 3-4 Fangio scheme. And I think in his heart, he loves it because it frustrated him offensively when it was run correctly, because he would have eaten up what the Vikings did if he had an opportunity to put his offense against that defense on a Sunday. But I do wonder if at the end of the day, they are going to keep that as their base, if they are going to morph it, change it. The one thing is in this league now, where O'Connell is right, although I thought it was a bit of a rope-a-dope statement, where O'Connell is right is you can call your scheme 3-4, 4-3, but the reality is you run different sets continually. Again, I'm going to come back to the most important thing, in my opinion. It's this. How are you going to use the players that you're going to be given from the first day? And second of all, are you going to be aggressive? Because, if you think about, to me, one of the biggest faults of the Donatel year was this. So this was supposed to be a defense that played 2 high safeties and didn't allow big plays. And yet they didn't stop them.
Yeah.
So, and that's why.
So what would you say you do?
You do, right. And that's why when we were talking about it, I did think at one point in time, I didn't expect it and it didn't happen. But there was a point where, it would have made sense to make a change. Because you're doing nothing. Like, you sold O'Connell on a vision of what you could do, and you didn't come close. And I know, I feel like now it's and there's not a ton of these people, but the Donatel apologists are like, well, look at the personnel. Look at that. But
Is there like a roving gang of Donatel apologists?
On Twitter, there's always a gang of something, right? There's always a gang of something. But I've seen tweets about, well, look at the personnel. It sucked. It's no good. That's not an excuse to me.
The Donatel defenders just roaming around Judd's at replies.
But Mike Tomlin was given a defense that had some really good pieces in 2006, but it didn't have Jared yet. And it wasn't great. There were some very questionable pieces. And you know what he did? He worked his ass off to maximize it. They weren't perfect. They gave up far too many short passing yards, which the Patriots exploited. But he also found a way to maximize the guys, yes. Kevin and Pat, right? And that's what this defense never did. Like, who did this defense maximize? Who did you watch and say, okay, yeah, those two players are talented and they are doing great? Za'Darius at first, Daniil in the end, sack-wise, but Daniil also was allowed to, in my opinion, disappear.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is, you can't just say, well, you don't have – it always comes back to that discussion here, and it drives me crazy, which is, well, you don't have the players for that. The offensive line sucks, so what's Kirk supposed to do? The defensive personnel is terrible. So what's anyone
supposed to do ever about anything?
Did you watch these games this weekend? Cincinnati's backup offensive line was magnificent.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fluke?
Agreed, dude. It is funny. I don't know if it's just like to protect ourselves from like the feeling of failure. Well, it's all out of our hands. What's Kirk supposed to do? What's Donatel supposed to do? And then it's like, well, what's the front office supposed to do? Is that the other? They're not drafting in the top 10. What are they supposed to do? It's just like a cycle of passing the buck. Well, I don't know. Come in here if you're a quarterback. Don't throw short of the sticks on 4th and 8 when your season's on the line. If you're a defensive coordinator, stop sitting back in a shell for 4 months while the defenses pick you apart week after week after week. If you're a front office, stop locking up veterans to these ridiculous contracts and then kicking the can down the road.
Exactly.
There's a lot of things within their control.
Exactly.
So, yes, these are 3 really interesting names. Flores being the headline.
Mm-hmm.
Desai probably being the one schematically that fits and the guy that they liked last year. Mm-hmm. And then we'll see with Nielsen going forward here. But, wow, that was a sports dad bringing the sports info solutions, bringing the cover 7.
Look at me. I'm just a new man. Like, I am going places I never used to go. I'm veering around the road now. Incredible.
We have a new partner alert on Purple Daily here. Okay. And I'm very excited about this because about 6 years ago, I discovered Athletic Greens products, and it added so much value to my life. And now we get to talk about this on Purple Daily. I know this may come as a shock to people. I'm not always great at getting all the right nutrients from my food on a daily basis. It can be tough. You're busy. Now I'm just making excuses, but this is where AG1 from Athletic Greens is huge. 1 scoop mixed with my water in the morning, and I'm covered for the day with 75 high-quality ingredients that give me important daily nutrients. This is the first thing I drink in the morning. In fact, sometimes on the show, you'll see me with just like a weird green drink in a big jug. Right now, it's water because I've already had my Athletic Greens AG1. But the biggest things I have noticed over the years when mixing AG1 into my daily regimen, brain fog lifted, energy levels heightened, helps with my gut health, which you guys all know about over the years, supports my immune system as well. And so I just feel dialed in, ready to unleash football takes to the world. In large part because of this daily routine of AG1 from Athletic Greens. So for you guys, the audience, if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/purple daily, athleticgreens.com/purple daily. When you go to that website and try this out too, it helps us so that they know that we are sending you. This has been a game changer for me over the years. Excited to have them on board. And speaking of being healthy, Judd has lost over 40 pounds a year and a half ago. Kept it off thanks to our friends at Livia.
That's Exactly right, Phil. The guy on the left, well, let's just say he was a little bit chunky, a little bit too chunky. The guy on the right, yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is the same Sports Dad. I know it's incredible. I know you're saying, no, it's not. It's a different person. But no, it is Sports Dad. And that is thanks to what Phil just said, which is a program that works, a program that is not a diet. It's Livia Weight Control Centers. That means that they are going to help you shed the pounds like they did for me. But more importantly, and the most important thing, it's not a quick fix. They're going to help you keep that weight off. And that's the most fantastic thing. And if you join now, you're going to get a special Sports Dad /Judd offer. That's right. Tell them that Judd from Score North sent you because you want a new you for the new year. And you're going to get 50% off the program. 50% off the program. What a deal. 855-GO. LIVEA, Livea.com, LIVEA.com. We've had a bunch of folks from the PD family join and send us pictures and have great success here. Inside or outside the state, it doesn't matter. They will take care of you and help you lose the weight. Livea.com.
All right. It's time now, gentlemen. We'll get to a mock before the episode is over, too, but it's time now for the annual check. Can you win a Super Bowl paying your starting quarterback a crap ton of money?
Football.
So, famously, as you may have heard us talk about on this show before, no team has ever won a Super Bowl paying one player more than 13.5% of the team's salary cap. Now, the Rams paid Matthew Stafford 11% last year, and they paid Jared Goff a bunch of cap money to play for the Lions. So I guess I'd put that one as an asterisk that they technically were kind of paying two quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Stafford was the only one on the roster, so people do point that loophole out as see, it can happen. Go pay your quarterback $1 bajillion and then berate your front office for not being able to build a roster. So here's the check-in, okay? 13.5% is the magic number. If you pay one player more than that, historically, you don't win the Super Bowl.
Okay.
The Bengals are paying Joe Burrow 5% of their team salary cap.
They should be arrested.
How about that, dude?
They should be. I can't even.
I love
I can't.
Better
I can't
get those
even.
refunds
funds,
ready.
baby.
Oh. Man crush of the highest order.
He just walked into a snowstorm in Buffalo.
And just did it.
Was throwing just like before the game, he threw that deep pass to the corner in warmups and did the slow motion spin.
man.
Like he's just not a care in the world.
No. It's
5% of the Bengals salary cap. Now that dude's going to get paid in about 3 years.
Yep.
And deservedly so. The 49ers. Let's take all three of their quarterbacks and put them in because, yeah, I mean, if you just do the Brock Purdy thing, they're paying him like
$2.
a 0.5% of their
He's
salary
paying them
cap.
to play.
Yeah.
It's like a lifetime fantasy cap dream. Lead
Yep.
your team to the NFC Championship.
So if you include Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance, it's like 10%. The Niners are paying about 10% to their quarterback room, somewhere in that ballpark. Still below the 13.5% threshold. The Philadelphia Eagles, 1%. Jalen Hurts is making 1% of their team salary cap. He'll get paid at some point too, but pretty good value.
And that will change things.
Yes, it will.
That one, Burrow might not.
That's
Jalen
the
Hurts
thing.
will change things.
Because the comp to Burrow when he gets paid would be the fourth team, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs. They're paying Patrick Mahomes 17% of their. That's right, 17%. Oh, over the threshold. Over the threshold.
I'm not sure they win Sunday.
Well, the high ankle sprain could throw the whole thing off. But
Yes, again.
if there is a quarterback, and maybe Burrow falls into this category in 3 years too, that can buck this trend, you would think it's Patrick Mahomes, maybe the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. But that's where it stands. So basically, if the Chiefs win, they will set a new mark.
Mm-hmm. If
the Chiefs get bounced, then once again for the umpteenth year in a row, 13.5%. It's like when the 72 Dolphins pop champagne every time somebody loses. You know, I don't know who pops champagne every time. I guess me. Maybe I pop champagne because this is proving my point every year.
Kirk haters all around the world just pop their champagne.
Yeah. So if you want to look at like the team spending, I looked this up last night on Over the Cap. So here are the, let's see, 6 teams that spent more than 13.5% on their quarterback room. The Chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when you have that guy,
Yeah, you're gonna have.
you can kind of just you do it and you just kind of get away with it, right? You say goodbye to Tyreek Hill, and you draft a guy in the 7th round or whatever, and you go sign somebody else, and your offense still scores 30 because you got that guy. So the Chiefs were over 13.5%. The Titans, the Commanders, the Vikings, the Lions, the Packers. Those are the 6 teams paying their quarterback room over 13.5%. Only 2 playoff teams out of those 6, only one that actually won a playoff game this year, the Kansas City Chiefs. Very interesting.
Why on earth? What would incentivize you as an executive or coach to go get Carson Wentz then? Because he eats up
stinks.
the majority of that cap space, though.
Yes. Or to pay Ryan Tannehill eats it all for the Tannehill, by the way, is that quarterback room is a $40 million cap hit quarterback room in Tennessee. Probably the worst value room in the NFL, right?
Off one good year. He had one really spectacular season.
In a very tricked up Derrick Henry situation. Sure. And they said, we're desperate. When you're above the 13.5% threshold, there's only like maybe 3 or 4 guys that it makes sense with. Mahomes, I think Josh Allen still, even though that team's going to erode now because they've kind of missed their chance a couple of years in a row. Joe Burrow at some point moving forward, but it's a very, very short list for everyone else on this list. And I think the Packers made sense because Aaron Rodgers was an MVP until he took a step back this year.
Yes.
So they're going to try and get off this list.
Yes.
But if you're on this list and you don't have a Hall of Famer, it's checkmate for your chances. So it's less of an anti-Kirk. It's more of a front office strategic thing. If you can get Kirk under this number, okay, let's have a different conversation. But why are you on this list if you know that it's checkmate and you don't have Patrick Mahomes? That's my biggest gripe.
So if you look at the Packers, though, because they're a really good example of exactly the problem. You know, their fan base and basically the outside world has always been like, well, you got Rodgers. Why don't you give him more? Why aren't you going out and getting more? Why aren't you getting a better defense? Why aren't you getting more receivers? The answer is partially, look, they have not drafted, I don't think, great for the most part, but part of the answer is because you can't. Like, look at the Bengals infrastructure. Look at that team. And that's going to change. When Burrow gets paid, he's going to be relied on to do more. Look at who they can pay on defense. I mean, if you watched, as good as Burrow was on Sunday, that was a complete team. They were marvelous in a lot of places where you are flat out, when Joe Burrow is breaking the bank, and he's going to, and he should, you're going to have to skimp. You're going to have to pull back and not pay as much. I'm going to give you a position that to me crystallized in the last 2 days clearer than ever. And it's going to be a position where a lot of folks are like, I don't know. And I'm going to tell you right now, the fact that the Vikings had to play Shandon Sullivan at nickel corner. Look at the nickel corners we just saw.
Yeah.
Ward in San Francisco, the Buffalo, the Bengals nickel corners. Those guys are all great players.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what the problem is? If you are paying a quarterback huge money, you can't afford that.
Well, you have to skimp. Yeah.
Those guys get paid.
It's like, okay, so Judd, you and Declan both go to the grocery store, and you're both given a $200 budget, or in the NFL's case, a $200 million salary cap budget. But here, you're both going to the grocery store. The goal is to cook the most impressive, tasty meal possible. Declan finds a $5 filet mignon. He's got $195 now to spend on everything else to make that meal incredible.
I know
Judd goes to the grocery store and finds a $36 Salisbury steak.
Oh.
Now, could Judd still, if Judd's an amazing chef, go buy 6 bottles of ketchup with the rest of your. So even it's possible that Judd, as an amazing culinary mind, could still find a way to make it work and present an incredible meal, right? And maybe Declan's a bumbling idiot in the kitchen, even with a $5 filet mignon. He goes and buys 6 watermelons, some bubble gum, and a spatula.
That all does.
And does nothing to fortify the filet mignon. But like, who's got the head start? Who's likely to cook the better meal? Probably Declan with his $5 filet mignon. And that's the Bengals right now. They have a $5 filet mignon. And so they can afford, and I haven't looked and like broken down exactly where they've spent some of their free agency money, but it's easier for them to then go get a slot corner or overpay for a right guard in free agency or something, right?
Yes, and but you bring up a very interesting, soon to be in a couple of years, conundrum for the Vikings, which is this too: Justin Jefferson. Because like
that's not a conundrum to me.
Well, but we're not picking. Well, but I'm saying is you're still going to have to operate in a very savvy way, because it's not like once Kirk is gone, you're going to have this windfall of we've got a ton of cash. You're still going to have to be smart about it, because he's going to get paid and he deserves it. Like that's what the Chiefs did with Hill. The Chiefs basically said, look, we've got the best quarterback in the league and possibly in history, not the championships that TB has, but he's unbelievable. And we can't afford this great player. And I think the rest of the world said, yeah, true. But the Vikings can't afford him. But then again, you're going to have to be very smart around him. And it's almost imperative now. And this is where the coach, to me, makes the biggest difference, that you can identify, because it's a tough game, that you can identify that quarterback who, if not Burrow, is at least going to be good enough on a rookie contract to help you win football games.
Well, even if you like make this more of a general conversation and not one that just like focuses on Kirk, because I think the focus on Kirk tends to just trigger people's emotions and blind people. You can't build a Super Bowl roster if you're paying market rate for every one of your starters. You won't be able to fit it under the salary cap. Right, it's a $200 million cap. You have 53 guys on a roster. The argument that like, well, he's getting paid what the market would. Okay, let's do he's getting paid market value across the board. All right, so then I have to have a $40 million quarterback, a $25 to $30 million wide receiver, a $12 million running back. It's all market value, right? There, Mark, a $12 million tight end. I need a $14 million right tackle.
Yeah,
eventually, I'm going to have.
What's the left tackle going to get?
A $20 million left tackle at some point, right? Well, it's all, the game isn't. You're not hanging banners of we paid market value for every one of our starters. Congratulations. You're looking for value, and so if I can get a Hall of Fame wide receiver for market value, I'd probably sign up for that, because I did get 4 or 5 years of a rookie scale contract. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, much like Patrick Mahomes on the quarterback side, or pick your Bosa or your edge rusher, right? I'll pay that market value, but I can't pay market value for every position. So would I rather pay top dollar for a Hall of Fame wide receiver or top dollar for a B-level quarterback? I'd rather take, because I've heard people say this, well, you rip the Cousins contract, when are you going to rip the Jefferson contract? I'm not going to, because he's a Hall of Famer. Cousins is getting paid the third most money to the cap to not carry the team like Patrick Mahomes does, or Joe Burrow, etc. So, by the way, we just did 6 players there off the top of our heads. Market value, right? 40 plus 25, that's 65, plus another 25, that's 90, 110, about 135 or 140 tied up in 6 players. And you still have 47 players, or I guess it's top 51, so 45 players left to go build a roster. You got to find value.
Defensive ends too. Pass rush ends.
Yes.
You talk about paying. Yes, that's why what we saw on Saturday from the Chiefs, which was a 7th round running back who was playing, is a very good idea. Oh, and by the way, your late round draft picks can play. Like, it's legal.
Dude, if
they
the Vikings
can come in and play.
If the Vikings swapped out in this offensive system, let's say it's Kirk, a competent B-level quarterback, a good quarterback, no one's trashing him. If you swapped out the version of Adam Thielen that we saw for Jalen Naylor,
yep,
would there really be, like, if you gave Jalen Naylor 60 snaps a game or whatever it is, and you gave, let's call it 40 snaps, and KJ Osborne is the number 2 or something, and he gets 100 targets or 90 targets, he's probably going to have 600, 700, 800 yards like Adam. Like, sometimes you have to just trust the young players that you're drafting instead of the $19 million aging guy whose wife is complaining on social media.
Well, and just, you know what? If you're going to draft guys, there's no rule that you can't play them. Like that's the thing. And that's sort of like where Zim and O'Connell were a little bit similar. It felt like the late round picks were like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that Naylor couldn't get more of a chance? And you know what? He might have struggled and then he can't play. But at least find out. And they'll say, well, we see him in practice, which to me is the most condescending thing. But it's like, look, there are, and that's the thing too, is like you can plug a running back in and play that dude. You can play those guys. It's fine.
Yep.
If Ty Chandler had stayed healthy, which he didn't, but there would have been no reason why that if Cook was gone, that you couldn't have played him.
Yes.
So like that's where it should not be hard. It's going to be a tough discussion, but it should not be hard to jettison several of these veterans so that you can plug guys in.
Dude, Ty Chandler, here's the thing. Ty Chandler played 5 years of high-level Power 5 college football, 4 years with Tennessee in the SEC, and 1 year with North Carolina as a second-year senior in the ACC. He carried the ball 603 times over 5 years in the top divisions or the top conferences in college football. He ran for over 1,000 yards, 6 yards a carry his last year. Do you think he can probably figure out what he's doing in the NFL to some extent? But yeah, it's like, oh, well, I know he was injured for most of the season, but there was never any thought to like him getting carries behind Dalvin Cook and Alex Madison. And I will actually defend the Kirk contract for a second in this way. If you start to, and we kind of did this in our cap cleanup episode a week ago, if you start to rank the least valuable or worst value Vikings contracts, Kirk is not one of the top 3 worst contracts on the team. Thielen at $19 million. Dalvin at like 12. Eric Kendricks at like whatever it is, 12 or 14. Maybe even Harrison Smith.
Well, yes. And the thing too, and the Niners prove this every week, but you're seeing this more and more, is as we see really sharp offensive minds morphing towards positionless football, Dalvin ain't that. I was totally wrong. Dalvin is, and I thought for like 3 years that he was decent, but he is not a good pass catcher. How many balls did we see him drop? But I mean, I'm self-reporting here because I said last year, throw the ball to him more. He can catch. He had made a fantastic catch against Pittsburgh in traffic. But Dalvin Cook is not positionless, it turned out, which is why I think they quit basically. I think when O'Connell got here, he had a scheme and thoughts of what Cook could do. And then he watched him. He's like, okay, he really can't. But, you know, when you see these guys split out and now they're a running back and now they're in motion and now they're doing this and that, that's what I want to find.
Yep.
I want to find a guy like that. I never want to see another like bell cow. I mean, Saquon Barkley is great, but you know what? He's going to get paid and he gets hurt. This whole bell cow thing, you know, this is our back. And, you know, I mean, hell, look at Zeke. He's a shell of himself.
Yeah. I mean, Pollard's been their best running back for 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, so this is the thing that I think O'Connell really needs to sit down and take a long, hard look at. It's not just his scheme, but how can he get more players now as he progresses in his tenure in here who fit different things that he can do, as opposed to a lot of guys who are basically, this is what I do well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's going to be very interesting to see from a coaching and from just a personnel standpoint, free agency cuts, everything, what the Vikings do the next few weeks, and the draft on the horizon. And gentlemen, I have for you,
I want a mock.
I got a mock. We're keeping track of as many mocks as we can on this show, and we're stockpiling sort of, you know, who has the Vikings drafting who and what position. So our mock draft roundup started last week. We did 3 mocks across Purple Daily and Mackey and Judd, and 3 different players. The guard from Florida, Osiris Torrance, the cornerback from Maryland, Deontay Banks, and then the offensive lineman from NDSU, Cody Mauch. And this brings us to WalterFootball.com, gentlemen.
They're coming fast and furious now.
Walter
every
Football.
day. It's just great to see Wally back.
I love how this site clearly launched on like an Angel Fire platform 25 years ago and has barely deviated from what they look like.
Why would you
back in the late 90s
with something that works so well as Wally Football?
It's great. Probably does. It shows up very high on search traffic. So this mock is presented in part by our friends at Underdog, making it more fun for you to watch football than it already is.
Yeah, those NFL refs, I thought I was going to get a hose job yesterday when they took away that Jamar Chase to Joe Burrow touchdown because old Dex Tweets had 2 props on both of that. However, I saw my guy Alex. He had a nice little 5-item parlay that hit earlier last week as well. So he took some overs from Wild Card Weekend and on TJ Hawkinson, on Kirk Cousins, Jamar Chase, etc. There's plenty of options. Now you got Championship Weekend coming up this week in Underdog Fantasy. Go down the Underdog Fantasy app. First-time users, if you use the promo code SCORE, if you haven't downloaded Underdog Fantasy, use promo code SCORE and they'll match your first deposit up to $100. Go download the Underdog Fantasy app.
We start with the first overall pick, the Chicago Bears. And they don't have trades, or they don't have the Bears trading here. They have the Bears straight up picking Will Anderson, the edge rusher from Alabama. The Houston Texans with their pick of any quarterback they want. C.J. Stroud from Ohio State. Let's see. I'm just going to skip around here. Bryce Young going to the Colts at 4. Ooh, Jalen Carter falling, the defensive tackle from Georgia falling to the Seahawks at 5.
Who went 3?
Bijan Robinson, running back Texas, to the Cardinals.
Wally.
Yeah.
Wally, what's going on?
Walter Football getting squirrely here.
Yeah, it's really squirrely.
Anthony Richardson, the third quarterback off the board, to the Raiders at 7.
Okay.
Will Levis dropping to 9. Okay, if Will Levis, who some think is the best quarterback, if Will Levis drops to like the 9-10 range, do you try to cobble together trade capital if you're the Vikings? Move up 13, 14 spots?
Oh, I'd certainly consider it, yes.
Quarterback of the future.
Now the question is, can you cobble? So that'd be, you'd swap first. You'd probably have to give them most of the rest of your draft because there's not a ton
next
of it.
Year's first.
You probably
for
have to give
sure.
them next year's first.
It's tough. It's tough to move up that far.
Wally is, my God, he is throwing curveballs, though.
He's not messing around. First receiver off the board, 12 to the Texans. That'd be Quentin Johnston from TCU. And then JSN, the receiver from Ohio State, going to the Patriots at 14. All right, let's get into, they have a page 2 here for the second half of the first round. And that brings us to actually a little receiver run here, interestingly. They've got, where's Addison? I don't know what Wally's doing here, but he's got Keyshawn Boot going to the Ravens at 22, which brings us to the Vikings. With Jordan Addison still on the board here, by the way. The Vikings taking, out of South Carolina, cornerback Cam Smith.
I want a mock!
The Vikings have a miserable secondary that couldn't stop Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and Richie James in 2 games late in the year. Cam Smith is a fast cornerback with long arms. So what do you think of, it's the second cornerback we've seen in our mocks so far.
Can we talk about this for a second? I feel like this is a given now, especially with the mocking community, that the Vikings are going to take a corner. And I completely get it. But can we talk about the investment that this team has previously made high in the draft on this position? You traded up in the second round to get Booth. Evans is a wild card now because he had 3 concussions, but I believe that you also traded up to get him. You're not that far from drafting Cam Dantzler. So, like, this is a very interesting, I can see it, but I don't know.
I just peeked. I didn't realize this is a 3-round mock.
Well, the
Walter
first round,
football.
The first round, it feels like he just got really over his skis at times. Not with the Vikings pick.
Well, they don't have a second-round pick, but I just peeked the Vikings' third-round pick out of Texas Christian University, TCU. Quarterback Max Duggan.
I want a mock.
Oh, he's from Iowa, coming back home, near home.
Interesting. Yeah, second in Heisman voting. His stats were ridiculous this year. He just made a huge jump as a senior. 3,700 yards, 9 yards per attempt. We all saw it. 32 touchdowns, 8 picks. Interesting. How would you feel about that if they took their shot at quarterback in the third round again? They whiffed on Kellen Mond, a different front office, but they whiffed on Kellen Mond. I think if you're not going to take first round shots, you should be taking some shot third, fourth round. If there's guys, a Hendon Hooker or Max Duggan, just get some guys in the pipeline.
Dex, go ahead.
Yeah, you got to take a shot at a quarterback eventually, and whether that's a third-round pick or a first-round pick, I get that. This team needs a lot of other help at positions like cornerback, so I wouldn't be surprised if corner is probably the number one option on the first round by the time the draft rolls around. But I would not hate them taking a quarterback again on day 2 of the draft. And look, are there Kellen Monds out there? Of course there are, but I can't petrify you from not wanting to draft a quarterback. So I would sign up for this. If Walter Football is indeed mocking this scenario, I'm in on this scenario.
I'd probably take a quarterback later than the third round because of this. It's my firm belief that this team needs to have a strategy in the 2024 draft to go up in the first round if they have to and get one. At some point here, like I'm all for cycling guys through to find out, but unless they're going to commit again to Kirk potentially for 3 more years or something like that, they're going to have a plan in place for the approach here. I probably wouldn't take one in the third round. I would take one with, a 5th round pick as a potential development guy, but I'm hoping that they have a plan for exactly how they think that they're going to replace Kirk, with the ripcord being potentially an immediate starter.
Yeah.
I don't love that, but I do think, there's got to be something in place unless guys in March, you are going to call up Kirk again and say 3 more years.
Well, if you're wondering on timing there, so the first day of the NFL league year is March 15th, I believe. Last year, it was around the same time. Let me just pull this up here. Yeah, March. So there's the negotiating period. The tampering period is March 13th to the 15th, and then the new league year is March 15th. That's when players can actually sign. So teams need to be cap compliant by then. Last year, it was March 13th that Kirk signed a 1-year, $35 million contract extension.
Right.
So we're probably 5 or 6 weeks away from one way or the other. Is he going to sign an extension? Are they going to go into the last year? They'll probably figure that out in the next 5 weeks or so.
Yeah.
So stay tuned to Purple Daily. Kirk Cousins Daily.
My prediction right now, they are going to sign him to another 1-year extension that gets him through 2024, and that's it.
Okay.
But then you've got to find a guy. So if you cut all of the guys that we've gone through, the veterans, you have those difficult conversations. You call in Dalvin Cook, you call in, Thielen. Hey, guy, it's been great, but what's the one position when free agency starts? So let's say that you free up enough cap space to make one splash. What's the position that you pursue? So it doesn't have to be a draft. You're actually going to make one free agent splash.
I want to, I know this is lame, but I'm going to do a deeper dive in the next day or two on free agents that are going to be available lining up with the Vikings' needs. Maybe that'll be an episode of Purple Daily this week.
Well, and that's guys to me that aren't household names coming out of their first contract.
26-year-old dudes.
Yeah, I don't want a guy I know. Oh, man, he's been around long in the tooth, but he brings a lot to the room. I don't need that crap. Because I am thinking this. If you are going to address corner in the first round, I would almost prefer to get a corner coming out of his first contract that I can sort of be my guy, and then things flow around him.
Yeah. Well, and they're going to have maybe $40-ish million in cap space when it's all said and done, which doesn't get you It gets you maybe, and there's ways you can maneuver, like a big signing bonus with a free agent, put that money into the 2024, 25, 26 seasons. But yeah, I think I'm going to withhold my answer and give you a more educated answer later on in the week here. Yeah, we are your home for Vikings off-season discussion and speculation here. Purple Daily, where we just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.